All right, welcome everybody. We're gonna wait a few minutes while we wait for everybody to join in. While we wait, go ahead and let us know, who's here in the chat and where you're coming in from, and maybe some things that you're looking to learn from today. Kick off.
London.
Yeah. Good. Oh, another from Seattle. Patrick always has the coolest location. Ooh, Malta. That's pretty cool.
Wow.
Francisca from Oaxaca.
Love Oaxaca.
She might have you beat, Patrick.
Yeah. Got a few Seattleites.
Yeah. Oh, another London. Just a few more seconds. If you guys just joined, we're just waiting for everyone to fill in. Definitely feel free to get friendly in the chat. Cool. I like dogs and more. Me too. There we go. Yes, pina coladas.
My Thai fan myself.
All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and kick it off. Thanks for joining, you guys. As you are hopefully aware by now, the topic is 7 common analytics tracking pitfalls and how to avoid them. My name is Tara. I'm part of the indicative marketing team. I'll help moderate the chat as well as facilitate any questions that come up with our 2 guest speakers. First, you can see here we have Patrick from Iteratively, who is a collaborative analytics tool, as well as one of my coworkers, Patrick, from Indicative. As you know, Indicative is a customer analytics tool built for product managers to help get actionable insights to optimize customer engagement, increase conversion, and improve retention. So from there, I'm going to let Patrick kind of kick off his introduction, and then we can dive right into it.
Is that Patrick or Patrick?
It's going to be a common theme, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick it off. So yeah, really happy to be here today and hope this is super valuable for everyone on the call. My name is Patrick. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Iteratively, a startup based out of Seattle, Washington, primarily helping companies capture and collaborate around their analytics. So really excited to be here today. Interesting fact, I just got into brewing kombucha, so that's my pastime at the moment. So I'll pass the puck over to Patrick.
Hi, I'm Patrick Gonzalez. I'm the customer success manager for Indicative. My job is to help our customers understand their data and then ask and answer business questions using data to achieve insights that they may not otherwise have access to. I live in Long Beach, California, and I guess a recent development in my life is I bought an electric scooter, which is a great way to get around. All right, so let's jump right in. So we'll start with what is event tracking. So event tracking, so that we're all on the same page, is the process of capturing and collecting and storing information about your users' interactions and touch points with a digital environment. So a digital environment is a digital product. It could be a website, it could be a web app, it could be a mobile app. Any user-initiated action can be recorded as an event. So you can think of things like view page or click button or submit form. Every product will be different. So every product has its own kind of tracking plan and data model. And we often recommend that the technical team, who often develop the tracking plan, and the business end users work together to come up with a plan that works best for them. So we want to start with some data basics. With an indicative, every query begins with an event. So an event, like I said, is a user-initiated action. Server-side events can be important too. It will depend on your product. But like I said, user-initiated actions can be things like page views or swipes or clicks or downloads or form submits, etc. Event properties describe the event. So it's the contextual information. They're sometimes called parameters in other platforms. With an indicative, we call it an event property. Examples of this could include the browser that the page was viewed in, or the URL that's linked to a button. Users, that one's pretty straightforward. Those are the people who do events, the individuals, the real life humans. They're your web visitors. They could be anonymous. They could be logged in. Users are the beings behind the data. And then user properties, or sometimes called user attributes, those describe the user. So that could be personally identifiable information. It could be contact information. It could relate to the business relationship, so their subscription plan or their billing plan. It could be payment info. User properties relate specifically to a user and often are used for comparing user groups to one another. So let's just jump right into the 7 common challenges in event tracking. So the first that we would want to highlight is too many unique events. So we often recommend 10 to 200 events per product. Advanced products or advanced teams might have several hundred events. We have one customer who sends us over 1,300 events for each of their products. And what that causes is a lot of confusion and a bit of overwhelm with their end users. So I get support tickets asking me, which event do I use for my customer journey funnel? Which event relates to my sign-up flow? When there's too many events, it becomes like looking for a needle in a haystack. It can often also be a symptom of using properties incorrectly. So if you're tracking each page view as a separate event, perhaps it's better to use a page view event as the base event, and then properties that describe that event. So in short, we want to keep it simple. We want to start small and then grow from there. And we want to grow over time. So event tracking is often an iterative business, hence the name iteratively, Patrick. And so we want to not start off with a bang. Let's start simple and then grow in complexity. So the second challenge is data modeling. Now, consistency is really key here. If you structured an event one way in the beginning, it's logical to carry that logic through all of your events or across all of your events. It's common to see problems here when events are tracked team by team or when the data model is developed in silos. You can imagine it's sort of like a library where some of the books are organized by color, some of them are organized alphabetically, some of them use the Dewey Decimal System, and some of them are organized by page count. It can be really confusing when you're switching between conventions to really understand how that data model is structured. Patrick, do you have any examples here?
Yeah, no, I think there's tons here. I think generally speaking, things become a mess when there's a lack of consistency or foresight into how the data should be modeled. So generally speaking, the more software teams you have, the more folks who are using and consuming analytics, the more thought needs to go into actually making sure your data model can be future-proof for the different variety of use cases that you might be looking to use and consume that data. There's a lot of companies we've chatted with who might have started small, haphazardly collecting events, but only to find farther down the line that the data model that they actually determined ahead of time wasn't supportive of some of the use cases that they wanted to use that data for. So yeah, having some good conversations internally around how this data is going to be used and consumed across the different variety of stakeholders definitely improves the overall consistency and longevity of the data when you think about the data lifecycle.
Awesome. So number 3, we have inconsistent naming. So there's a few different ways that this presents itself. Even if the underlying event data is okay, the naming can cause problems, especially for end users. So this customer on the left has 9 different events with the word product in it. But for me, I don't understand the difference between add product to order, basket product add, click add products to order, or product added. They all seem the same to me. I'm not really sure how I would approach using this within a query. Again, this is pretty common with teams that are tracking things separately and then compiling that information into a data model. So you'll want to review those and aim for consistency, as always. Another thing we see in this example is problems with casing. So the first event there, add product, that's camel casing. So the lowercase first word, capitalized second word. The second event here has each word capitalized. The third one has all caps. That can cause some confusion as well, especially as you're adding more and more events. Just visually, this is difficult to navigate. So keeping that casing consistent can really help your end users become more comfortable and confident with the data. And then, Patrick, I know you had an example from iOS and Android teams building separately and then coming together.
No, definitely. I think the Android versus iOS comes up all the time, where you might have a PM defining event who owns the Android product, and you have another PM on the iOS side, and that comes up pretty common for most of the companies that we talk to. A lot of the other things that come up is tense. So you might have somebody using past tense versus present tense, pluralization. So as an add product or add products, in the sense that you might be able to add multiple products. So standardizing on these conventions and having clean, good documentation and standards is super important. And I think the best way to do this is to kind of have a review process generally as a team, and either set up a tribe or somebody who can kind of help shepherd this along to ensure that you get good, clean, quality data from the start.
Data shepherds, for sure. All right, so number 4, I think we're on number 4, events not firing correctly, or they're firing too often. So confidence in event counts is important, but that said, event counts will differ across platforms. It's important to QA every single event before you productionize it. We have an example of a customer, a large multinational company with engineering teams all over the place. The team developed an event and added it to the model, and that event started growing exponentially. So within weeks, they were sending us billions of events. It turns out it was a notification event. So it's a really low value event, but what it caused is a huge usage of their data capacity. So it was really important for them to have reviewed that event to ensure that it's firing as expected and that it's usable by the end users who will actually be using the analytics. It's a common temptation to track everything. It's also common to make some mistakes. We all make mistakes in programming or developing events. So we've also seen that sometimes there are double events firing, or events will fire simultaneously, which causes problems. So it's really important to QA that and review and make sure in a test environment that everything is as expected before finalizing that. All right, wrong data types. So this is particularly common when numbers are involved. So we've got strings, which are different than numbers, which are different than enumerations. As an example, you can think of 7 items is different than $7, which is different than their 7th purchase, which is different than their 7th session, And each of those is describing a different situation. So it's really important to pay close attention to what the property is actually describing and how that property value is going to be used, whether it's in a calculation or just a count, etc., before deciding on a data type for a given field. And then the seventh common challenge is missing user properties. So these are sometimes called group properties. Event-based analytics is only as powerful as the data permits. So if you're not capturing or sending user attributes, then you're limiting the insights that you can actually achieve. So it's kind of like solving a puzzle with missing some pieces. User properties can be saved alongside event data, or they might be developed separately. So you may have a separate data source that describes your user subscription plans or price points. Those can be sent separately often. So what we recommend is that to get the most value, you develop a separate strategy or a similar strategy, specifically looking at users and user properties. Patrick, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I think this is one of the areas that most folks make mistakes, I think, early on, is just understanding how to use user properties, what properties to attach to an event versus to like an identify method or a group method. Specifically, this comes down to how you want to query and slice and dice the data at the end of the day. It's really important to think through this as you would your event structure as well. Quite often, tools can make use of these traits or properties on the identifier, on the user, and on the group. So being able to plan that out as well, understand what should be tracked there versus what should be tracked on the event, and how this is modeled in your data warehouse is definitely something to keep top of mind.
Perfect. And I misspoke. That wasn't number 7. That was number 6. This is number 7, timestamp challenges. So I often say, don't overthink this one, right? A timestamp describes a point in time. And it's true also that time is relative. So 11 a.m. here in Los Angeles is 2 p.m. in New York, is 8 p.m. in Paris. So we often recommend recording your data in UTC, so Coordinated Universal Time, and then using ISO 8601 for formatting and time zoning considerations. Some examples that we've seen are one of our customers was sending all of their events for a particular day with the same timestamp. So it appeared as every event occurred at midnight on a day. We also have customers who send us their data in local time. That might work if your team is all located in the same place, but it becomes particularly tricky when your team is distributed. So we have customers with teams in New York, Australia, London, etc. So you want some universal standard to make sure that each team is able to understand and interpret the timing of those events in the same way. Again, the theme for everything is keep it simple, keep it consistent. So I'll turn it over to you, Patrick. How does a tracking plan help you avoid these?
Well, definitely appreciate the 7 common pitfalls and challenges that teams face. And, I think one of the things that I second here is, the best thing to do is just to start small and get started. As you encounter these, there will be mistakes that you probably make, and the goal is just to improve over time. But, one of the things that analytics is inherently messy and causes teams to often lose trust in their data when they hit these issues. They are definitely overcomable, and you can definitely improve. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how good your analytics tool is if you can't trust the data. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is how to prevent these issues from happening. And the best way to do that is actually start by creating a tracking plan for your company. So what is a tracking plan? A tracking plan is a kind of the cornerstone of your analytics strategy. It helps you codify a single source of truth for what matters to your business, your data. It enables you to standardize data collection by capturing clean, well-structured data from the start, and avoid a ton of wasted time second-guessing your analytics or having to munge the data downstream. And most teams have some sort of data dictionary in place. This could be a Confluence page or a spreadsheet that's really trying to govern or outline the data that they want to capture for the team. And there are purpose-built tools like Iteratively, which really try to help provide better guardrails for teams when it comes to analytics implementation. And as outlined in the beginning, there are many reasons you kind of need a tracking plan, but it all comes down to garbage in, garbage out. you have the best of intentions as your team, but over time, there's always mess that arises when it comes to your analytics. And we've worked with many companies who have to start from scratch because they didn't establish a tracking plan and a way to govern their analytics upfront, and the data quickly becomes unusable. And once you have data bugs, folks tend to lose trust in the data, which means they use data less, which means tracking is often deprioritized or not maintained. And this is kind of a vicious cycle and not a position that you want to be in if you're looking to have a successful analytics implementation. You don't want to find out that you've been making business critical decisions off of bad data. It's important to get the foundation right. And again, start small and grow over time. Cool. And so how do you start with a tracking plan? It all starts with kind of determining your business goals. Patrick mentioned, determining what your core events are. Start small. Don't boil the ocean with tracking thousands of events. Really determine your business goals, determine what you're trying to achieve, and you want to ladder up your macro and micro level metrics you're optimizing for. These are going to be your core metrics. When you're just getting started, again, focus on the top 10 events, the next 10 events after that, the next 10 events after that. Don't try to go boil the ocean with 200, 300, 400 events if you're just getting started. And if you're in a position where you have thousands of events implemented, and we have some customers we're working with who have thousands of events, it's really hard for data consumers to understand how that data is being used, what that data actually means semantically. So again, you're only increasing the size of the haystack, but the needle kind of remains the same size. And as you grow, your use cases for data are going to become more sophisticated. So you will need richer, granular level data. But again, at the earlier stage, there's always a trade-off between relying on qualitative information like user interviews versus session recording and analytics. So understand what's important for your business, given the stage of the company that you're in, and really optimize for that. But analytics aren't a one and done. So it needs to be treated as a feature of your product, just like we treat performance and security these days as a feature of our product. Quite often folks think that they can implement analytics and it's done. They can wipe their hands clean and go off about their day. But the reality is that analytics are a feature and you kind of have to give it the same amount of affordance and treatment when you think about planning and how you work with other members of your team. We often see teams forget to update or add tracking to a release or test to ensure that the events are properly instrumented. Patrick talked about this quite a bit already. There's nothing like when your CEO asks you, how's an experiment going, only to find out weeks after you launched it that you didn't have the proper instrumentation in place. I've been in that situation. It's not fun. Or when you accidentally remove an event and it breaks your marketing automation emails for a month. And that happened to us when I was at Atlassian. And that's lost revenue for the business. So this is definitely impactful when you don't give analytics the affordance that they need and treat it as a feature of your products. And these, unfortunately, are common occurrences for most of the teams that we work with. So how do we fix it? Generally, it's time to start thinking about analytics as part of your SDLC. So how do you integrate it as part of your software development lifecycle as you ship new features? And the number one recommendation we have for folks is to treat analytics like code. Make sure it's version controlled, and that you have a review and approval process to govern changes. Whether or not this is in tools like GitHub or Bitbucket or in a tool like Iteratively, it's important to make sure everyone's on the same page about what you're tracking, why you're tracking it, and how that data is being used. And secondly, start testing it. There's obviously ways that you can manually test analytics, but nobody is ever going to spend the time to do that. No one wants to hold up a release by having to go through the app and manually test it. It's very time consuming and labor intensive. Our recommendation is to integrate analytics testing into your existing test suite. So if you have functional tests or unit tests or integration tests already written, make sure that you're asserting that the events are actually firing as part of that with the correct properties, with the correct data types, and integrate it into CI/CD. So if analytics break, you break the build. Generally, this makes sure that teams, engineers, everybody involved give analytics the affordance that they need so that you're not shipping broken releases or releases that break analytics, causing downstream problems. And lastly here, the third thing we recommend is making sure analytics are part of your definition of done. So if you're shipping a new experiment or a new feature release, make sure you never ship without tracking. Stop the cord, pull the ripcord, make sure you stop the release if the analytics aren't in place. You never will be able to get that data back. And then, so how do we integrate analytics into our process so that it's less of an afterthought? Quite often when we're talking to PMs or data analysts at organizations, they always struggle to figure out how to get team buy-in that this is important and should be given affordance or a seat at the table. And so when working on a new feature, our recommendation is to schedule a planning meeting to determine the goals. What are we doing? How will we measure success? And then prioritize tracking according to those goals. And once you have those goals determined and the tracking determined for those and how you're going to be answering those questions, translate that into a Jira ticket. So create a subtask for each feature that needs tracking so that's not forgotten by your engineering team. And then keep your tracking documented. You can use iteratively, of course, for that, or there's other ways that you can do it as well. But as part of your documentation, make sure that you include, visuals to help the team know when an event is firing. Again, this is very important if you have an Android team and an iOS team, and you want to make sure that it's very clear that, hey, when this button is clicked, this is the event that is going to be fired, and with these set of properties. And speaking of properties, make sure that you're actually outlining what properties should be included on these events, including their data types. It's also really helpful to include things like example values for your developers. So as they're going through the instrumentation, they know exactly what data you as the analyst or the PM are looking to expect to receive downstream in your analytics tools. And thirdly, when an event, make sure that you document when an event was instrumented. This is super important to understand, hey, if I was to do some analysis, when was this event first instrumented and when was it actually last verified to be accurate, regardless of if that was manual testing, if that was part of your release process in CI/CD, but you want to make sure that the data that you're looking at is reliable. And with so many people involved, from customer success to sales to marketing to product to engineering, when it comes to using analytics events, it's important to have a single owner. Analytics can become a bit of a hot potato within organizations where no one wants to own the tracking plan. So establish clear ownership. This might be your head of analytics, head of growth, a PM on the team. We tend to recommend that product managers own the tracking. They're directly responsible for the success of the product. They should be responsible for ensuring that tracking is instrumented as part of the release cycle. Or, in the context, if you have a product analyst, they can be the ones that own this as well. But it really depends on the size of your team, the data maturity of your organization, and the processes that you have in place. But all that really matters is that you have a clear owner. If it's owned by everybody, it's owned by nobody. So make sure that it's very clear.
Yeah, and this is important as well from an analytics perspective, to have an internal champion or an internal voice to answer those data questions from the data consumers. Your analytics provider, I can assure you, I don't know your business as well as you know your own business. And I, as much as I try, don't know your tracking plans as well as you do. So having an owner and having kind of clear ownership and an established process for reviewing that tracking really improves the use and adoption of analytics, not just from your team, but across your organization.
Yeah, and I'll add on that real quick.
Sure.
I'll add on that real quick, Patrick, which is like one of the things that we see work really, really well for customers that we work with is establishing that data tribe, whether or not that's a Slack room where folks can ask questions, or having brown bags or town halls where folks can go in, ask like, hey, how would I answer this question with the data that we have today? But being able to improve, self-service analytics or data democratization within organizations is very much driven quite often by a champion, who typically is the one that's owning analytics within these organizations. So being able to evangelize this data and the importance of analytics is definitely something that we see valuable for organizations who want to make sure that data quality and analytics tracking are implemented correctly. I'll pass the puck back to you.
Sure. To wrap up, and then we can take questions in just a second. How does a tracking plan improve analytics? So there's three obvious ways that we've talked about today. So the first, consistency is key. So consistent rules means end users know what to expect and how to navigate the data. So your data consumers will be more likely to adopt analytics as part of their own work if they can easily query the data or manipulate it, calculate it, etc. Secondly, usability. So you heard some examples of of data that was incredibly difficult or confusing, what that does is it drives down adoption. If something takes too long, people move on, or they find a different way to do it. So what I see is a lot of our customers make a good faith effort to maybe track everything or track something in a way that isn't well thought out. And it hurts them in the long run. So I often say, just like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, spending more time on your tracking plan will actually save you time and money and resources in the long run. And then thirdly, complexity. So a well-reasoned, a well-designed and complete data set, which can be iterated and developed over time, it actually unlocks deeper insights and more advanced analysis than if you're constantly trying to prune the hedges and fix mistakes. That's especially true when you're optimizing over time. So if you have that consistent foundation and you make an optimization, you can observe that change in the behavior of your users through time. So consistency, usability, and complexity are the result of having a well-reasoned and well thought out tracking plan. So I think we're just slightly over time, but we've got time for questions. And I know we've got a few here in the chat.
So I just popped right back up and I'll help you guys answer that. Like how I just, appear again. Jeff asked, I think this was when Patrick was speaking a few slides back. I can bring it back up. But he said, do you recommend creating separate haystacks to mitigate sprawl?
Great question. So it depends on what those haystacks are. So as an example, when we were at Atlassian, we're multi-product company, 12 different products. We had one event collection platform because a lot of the questions that we wanted to ask were related to things like how customers are navigating from one product to the other, how they're using products in connection. So we see a lot of teams by default try to say, hey, each product is going to have its own individual haystack in your example. But a lot of the questions that you might want to ask your data are going to be related to how folks are cross-flowing across these things. So it really comes down again to what are the questions that you're asking, which will help you determine the data model and how you are actually capturing the data downstream. There's no real right or wrong answer here. When it comes to ownership, we tend to see, product owners for each one of those haystacks wanting to answer that correctly. But a good example is like your user signed in event, even if you're in a multi-product company, should probably have the same properties and attributes across the board. So there's no reason to create different haystacks, different silos, or different projects potentially in your analytics tools.
Yeah, and just building on that, you'll want to create kind of a consistent language that's easily understood across the organization so that the developer, when presenting results to the business analyst, or the business analyst when presenting results to executives, are all speaking the same language. And then to the question of haystacks, within indicative, you can have multiple projects. So sometimes we see customers with a project for each product, and then they may have a master project that reflects all of their products. So if you have consistent conventions through each product, that comes together nicely, and you can get a full big picture of that unified timeline from anonymous behavior arriving on the website right through to their billing upgrade and multiple purchases thereafter.
Yeah, and even not at just the event level, but even on the metric level, you don't want different teams analyzing, as an example, monthly active users differently across all your different product teams. So making sure you have standardization, not just on the way that you're collecting events, but also how you're reporting on those events is very critical.
Love it. All right. So David had another question. If you guys can see it, it's for Patrick specifically. For product managers, do you recommend specifying the event tracking requirements for a particular feature as an acceptance criterion within the JIRA issue for that feature, or as a separate tracking related JIRA issue?
Yeah, the way that we typically recommend is that PMs, as part of their spec document, whether or not you're doing PRDs or user stories or however you manage your spec, they have a section in there, and that could be on a Confluence page that outlines their tracking. And then on the user story, as you start doing your breakdown of the work, you actually create a subtask or a ticket specifically to capture what needs to be done as part of that feature release or experiment release to make sure that tracking is actually implemented accordingly. And then link back to that inside of your spec document to make sure that, hey, check, this is Analytics have been reviewed by all the stakeholders. Yes, analytics have been implemented correctly, and I have tested it. We tend to see in the majority of organizations that we work with that PMs do go validate that the analytics events have been correctly instrumented. They are the ones who are going to have to own it at the end of the day. So yeah, it's definitely something that's included both in the spec document as well as in Jira.
Cool. Next one real quick. We'll go till 3 more minutes if that's good with you guys. But what do you recommend as event tracking goals for an app used by internal users, such as a CRM?
It's an interesting question. I haven't thought specifically about an app used for internal users, but anytime you're thinking about event goals or conversion events, I tend to work backward from the metric or from the business question. So if you're tracking, for example, how many entries are added to a CRM, then the metric would be number of entries, and then you work your way backwards from there. And you kind of recreate or reconstruct. I often just map them out, either on a piece of paper or in a doc. I map out all of the different steps: the click, the swipe, the save button, anything that is interactive, all those touch points to arrive at that goal event. And then those start to sift out what events you need to be tracking. Patrick, do you have anything to build on that?
No, I think that's definitely good, and I think that goes into like outlining what is your as part of that experiment or feature work, like what is your macro level metric and what are your micro level metrics. So like standard conversion optimization, you're gonna have like some success criteria for that piece of work that you want to potentially want to move a metric, right, by 10%. And so that's going to be your primary success criteria. But then you also have all these secondary success criteria, and it could be more user experience related, like how many people actually interact with this element on the page as part of the funnel. And so those are all secondary success criteria. But you definitely want to make sure that the tracking for those is just as important if it's going to inform future potential development work.
This last question, it's a little long. Can you guys see it? It's by Daniel at the bottom of the chat.
Yeah.
Don't know if you had a chance to read it, but for the likes of a tool like Snowplow,
yep.
You got it, Patrick?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. Just to repeat it, it's is it possible to add linked entities to events within Iteratively for a user or a product with a number of standardized attributes? In the context of Iteratively, the way that we think of ourselves is we are a schema registry. So, and we support JSON schema. We do have Snowplow integration. We have the concept of templates, which is very similar to entities in Snowplow land. So you can create a template and link multiple templates to an event, or so you, as an example, you might have a user signed an event that has an account template or an account entity with a set of attributes that you're going to link to it, and then we'll actually send an event payload that includes that. It includes all the information to Snowplow or any other analytics tool. In the context of nested objects, that's actually a really good question. We're actually adding support for that as we speak to validate nested properties. Complex object types are not supported by the vast majority of analytics tools out there today. So it is very tricky, but yeah, we are adding support so that if folks are sending the data to their data warehouse or into something like Snowplow, you'll get first-class integration support there.
Yeah, nested properties. Anytime I see nested from an analytics perspective, I start to get nervous. Indicative, for example, doesn't support arrays of property values. And so it becomes difficult when you have, for example, the object is a basket and you've got multiple items in that basket, but we can only display one value. So how would you describe that basket? Now, we can say how many items are in it, but we can't necessarily tell you which items they are. So
yeah, we work with a lot of e-commerce companies, and like if they want to use a tool, like most tools just stringify it, and just like, it's just awful for analysis because you won't be able to actually. But like if you're sending the data to BigQuery, like you have support for nested objects inside of BigQuery right away, which is great. But yeah, the majority of visual analytics tools don't support this, so it really depends on, and it really just depends on what tools you're looking to adopt. At the end of the day.
Cool. All right. think that is all of our questions. I'm going to put one last poll up for everyone. Iteratively offered a 30-minute analytics consultation. So I'm going to put this poll up to see who wants to take advantage of that. Obviously, they are experts, so I would suggest it. Also, when we close this session out here in just a second, you will be given a chance to jump right into indicative. I know an earlier poll, it's about 50-50 split of people having already collecting data as well as already having a tracking plan. So you'll get a chance to maybe put some of that into practice and play around with different analyses for as long as you'd like.
Yeah, I would just add in closing, if you've got a tracking plan, take the 30-minute analytics consultation just to sense check and review. If you don't, what a great opportunity to get some help along the way. If you've got data, you've been tracking, you've got event-based data to consume, there are over 17 different ways to send your data to indicative, and we're happy to work with you on that. If you're not interested in sending us your data just yet, you can access our public demo at indicative.com. But thanks everyone for giving us the time to speak today, and I hope you learned something new or enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.